My life is like a wildflower growing between the cracks of stone, where no one would expect life to sprout. 83 years have passed, and today I, Emily, bring my true story into the light. Georgia in the 1950s was where I grew up, in a small house next to my father's general store. Before we start, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Try to watch the videos as long as possible, by watching more often. YouTube will promote these stories to a larger audience, grow your channel, and bring you more interesting things. Let's start now. Every morning, the scent of coffee brewed by my mother, Josephine, mingled with the aroma of bread from Alfred's bakery, creating the melody that woke my childhood. The rules of that time were harsher than seasoned timber, where we women were born already knowing our place. The bell of the store still echoes in my memory, just as the pain still simmers quietly within me. There are wounds that time cannot heal, only accept. If you ask whether God has a plan for everything, I still don't have an answer. What I do know is that sometimes it is our greatest stumbles that lead us to the most unexpected happiness. My name is Emily, and today at 83 years old, I have so much to tell. You know, my dear, life wasn't always the bed of roses you see on television. In my time as a young girl back in the 1950s, the world was very different. Sometimes I wonder if God had a plan for me when He let everything happen the way it did. Well, only He knows. What I know is that my story might seem sad, but it also has its beauty. It's like those stubborn flowers that grow in the middle of the asphalt. You know. So let me tell you how this little flower managed to bloom, even with so many stones in the way. It was 1955. I had just turned 12 years old. We lived in a small town in rural Georgia, one of those where everybody knows everybody. Our house was right next to my father's general store. Every early morning, the smell of coffee that my mother, Josephine, made would mix with the aroma of fresh bread coming from Alfred's bakery on the corner. The house wasn't much. It had a rather cramped living room because of the dining table, 2 bedrooms, one for me and my brothers, the other for my parents, and a lean-to in the back where my paternal grandparents lived. And there was the kitchen, of course, which was the kingdom of my mother and Grandma Gertrude. Early in the morning, before the sun properly appeared, I was already up. I had to make the beds and then go to school. You wouldn't believe it nowadays, but back then, girls were born already knowing that their place was taking care of the house. After school and lunch, I would go work at the store. Paul was years older than me and was already there from early morning. As for my younger brothers, Frank and Albert, they didn't work in the store. He had stopped studying to help Father, who always had to go buy products to sell in neighboring towns. Paul was smart. He could do mental math better than anyone. He was the one who took care of the cash register when Father wasn't around, and I cleaned and organized the shelves. As for my younger brothers, Frank and Albert, they didn't work in the store. Father wouldn't let them even get near the cash register. They were very messy and broke everything they saw. These two are only good for causing losses. Father would grumble. So they stayed at home helping Mother with the simpler tasks. In the general store, which we called the store back then, it was always busy. I remember as if it were yesterday, the little sound of the bell every time someone entered. Ding, ding. And there I'd go with my worn-out apron to serve the customers. I want half a pound of sugar. Give me a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes. It was like that all day long. You know what marked me the most? The smell, a mixture of coffee, tobacco, bar soap, and that kerosene we sold for lighting lamps, because electric lighting was a luxury few could afford. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still smell that scent. It's funny how our memory works, isn't it? But not everything was rosy at home. The rules were harder than a block of wood. My father, a serious man, hardly ever spoke. But when he opened his mouth, it was to give orders. Emily, fix that skirt. Paul, stop being lazy and go help at the store. We obeyed immediately. In those days, children didn't dare talk back to their parents. My mother, poor thing, lived between the cross and the sword. She wanted to protect us, but also couldn't go against my father. How many times I had swallowed my tears, pretending everything was fine. It was sad. You know, but that's how things worked. And Grandma Gertrude, oh, she was a tiny figure, but with a tongue sharper than a razor. She was always grumbling in the corners, but deep down she had a soft heart. It was from her that I learned how to make that cornbread that I still make for my grandchildren today. You know, my dear, looking back now, I see that life was hard, but simple. We didn't have much, but we also didn't know anything different. It was all about working, praying, and respecting our elders. Back then, I couldn't even imagine what destiny had in store for me. I was just a girl full of dreams, thinking the world ended right there at the town square. If you've ever heard cruel words from your own family, if you've been made to feel small in your own home. Type 10, so I know you're listening. If there's one thing that stays in my mind, it's the dinners at our house. Every single day at 7 o'clock sharp, the entire family would gather around that old wooden table that creaked like a grumpy old woman. It was sacred. You know, even if it was raining cats and dogs, nobody dared to miss it. The table stood there, imposing in the cramped living room, covered with a lace tablecloth that Grandma Gertrude had made. My father always sat at the head, like a king on his throne. On his right side was my mother, always with her head down, serving everyone without saying a word. My brothers and I squeezed ourselves on the other side, trying not to make noise even with our breathing. The grandparents completed the picture, one on each side. Oh, if that table could talk, how many secrets it would have kept, how many looks of disapproval, swallowed sighs, and unspoken words it witnessed. Silence was rule number 1. At an educated person's table, you don't open your mouth to speak, only to eat, my father would say. And woe to anyone who disobeyed. The leather belt that hung behind the kitchen door was always at hand, a constant reminder of what could happen. In those moments, I would wonder, are all families like this? Did God make things to be this way? Because look, if it was supposed to be a blessing, sometimes it seemed more like a trial. Oh, my dear, if there's one thing nobody prepared me for, it was the changes in my body. Around my 12th year, I started to notice that things were different. It was as if my own body had become a stranger to me. First, it was my breasts. Out of nowhere, they started to grow, and I didn't know what to do. I hid behind loose blouses, dying of embarrassment. Grandma Gertrude was the one who noticed. One day, she came close to me and whispered, "Girl, it's time for you to wear a bra." Heavens, I was so embarrassed, but there was no way around it. Off I went with Grandma Gertrude to buy my first bras at Mrs. Helen's store. I tried them on, hidden behind a screen, feeling as if I were doing something forbidden. Those pieces were a torment, you know. They itched like straw and squeezed like barrel hoops. I felt all tied up, but what could I do? It was the way it had to be. Grandma Gertrude never stopped repeating, "Girl, if you don't wear them, your breasts will sag like those of the Indians at the Grand Canyon." I didn't even know what the Grand Canyon was. but the idea terrified me. So I swallowed the discomfort and resigned myself to that new prison. Then came menstruation. Lord Jesus, what a fright. One fine day, I woke up and there was blood on my nightgown. I thought I was going to die. I ran crying to my mother, thinking I had some serious disease. My mother, poor thing, was more embarrassed than I was. She explained, all flustered, that it was normal that every woman went through this, but the details, nothing. It was all very vague. You know, that's just how it is. Daughter, now you're a young lady. Come to think of it, I was actually lucky. Many girls my age didn't even get that basic explanation. Some mothers simply handed their daughters some cloths and told them to figure it out on their own. In those days, matters related to the body and menstruation were considered taboo. Nobody dared to talk about it openly. At school, it was all whispers. The girls would gather during recess to exchange information, always afraid someone might hear. Has it started for you yet? How do you keep from staining your clothes? There was Sandra, who was Mrs. Marlene's daughter. This Mrs. Marlene was different from everyone we knew. In her house, it seems they talked about everything openly. So Sandra would come full of news, telling us what she learned at home. Mercy. We would be astonished. Everyone wanted to be Sandra's friend. To tell the truth, I wanted to be Sandra myself. She knew things, had a mother who explained everything. I can't deny I was terribly jealous of that girl. Me and half the world. And the boys. Oh, those were some rascals. They would provoke us, making jokes. If a girl was in a bad mood, they'd say she was in those days. We would die of embarrassment, but couldn't say anything. I remember once I had such bad cramps at school. I was curled up at my desk, cold sweating, afraid to stand up in case I had stained my skirt. The teacher, Mrs. Rose, asked if I was feeling ill. I almost died of embarrassment. I could only shake my head, saying it was nothing. The worst of all is that we knew nothing about our own bodies. Everything was a mystery. Everything was a sin. If someone asked how babies were born, the answer was always the same. The stork brings them. Imagine that, and we believed it. Of course, once, I secretly got a book from the library that talked about the human body. It felt like I was reading something forbidden. Every page I turned, I looked around to see if anyone was watching. In those days, that's how it was. We discovered things little by little, always afraid, always hiding. It was like walking in the dark, groping, stumbling, not really knowing what was happening. And the dreams, those. I started having strange dreams that left me all confused. I would wake up sweating, my heart pounding, not really understanding what had happened. I was terrified to tell anyone. Thought it was a sin. It was around this time that I started becoming interested in boys. But it was all very innocent. A glance at church, a shy smile in the square. Nothing beyond that. If my father had suspected anything, God help me. Looking back now, I see how unprepared we were. How many problems could have been avoided if we had had better education, proper guidance. But as they say, we can't change the past. What we can do is learn from it and try to do differently with the next generations. And it was in this climate of mystery and discoveries that I grew up. Around this same time, I also started becoming more interested in books. Not that I didn't like to read before, but now it was different. It was as if books could tell me all those secrets that adults hid from us. At school, there was a new literature teacher, Mr. James. That man was a well of knowledge. He spoke in a way that made us travel without leaving our desks. He was the one who introduced me to great writers. I remember as if it were yesterday when he read to the class an excerpt from The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. My cheeks turned as red as a bell pepper, but I couldn't stop listening. From then on, I became a bookworm. I would spend hours hidden among the library shelves, devouring one book after another. Mrs. Judith, the librarian, even found it strange. "Be careful not to go crazy from reading so much," she would say. But I didn't care. One day, I found a book hidden at the back of a shelf. It was a sugary romance, one of those very silly ones, but it had some scenes. Ave Maria. I took it home hidden, wrapped in my notebook. At night, I would read under the covers with a little flashlight. If my father had found out, it would have been a disaster, especially since I had secretly taken the batteries from the store. And it wasn't just with books that I dreamed. I started having crazy ideas about studying, about being a teacher. Imagine that, a small-town girl wanting such things. My father almost had a fit when I mentioned it. A woman's place is at home, taking care of her husband and children, he said. I was devastated, but I didn't give up on the dream. At the general store while serving customers, I would imagine what it would be like if I could go to the big city and study. I would see all those well-dressed women passing by on the street and think, one day I'll be like that. It was silly. I knew, but dreaming cost nothing. Right. Sometimes, when I was alone, I would take one of my mother's old dresses and look at myself in the cracked bedroom mirror. I imagined myself all important, teaching in a fancy school. Then I would quickly put everything away, afraid someone might see. The worst was when Sunday came. There we all went to church, me in my proper little dress with a rosary in hand. Father Joseph was always saying that a proper young lady couldn't have these worldly thoughts, that we had to be obedient, modest. I would be gnawing inside, thinking I was committing some sin just by dreaming of a different life. But not everything was sadness. There was Lucy, my best friend. We would meet secretly at the old apple tree in the back of her yard. We would spend hours talking, exchanging confidences. It was to her that I told my dream of being a teacher. She looked at me with those bright eyes and said, "One day you'll make it, Emily. You'll see. You're stubborn." And so the days passed, between hidden dreams and harsh realities. I was growing, transforming. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking about the future, imagining what my life would be like in a few years. Would I accomplish my dreams, or would I end up like so many other girls in town, married young and full of children? Oh, my dear, we've come to the part that changed my life forever. It was in 1958. I had just turned 15. Jack appeared in town like a whirlwind, stirring everything up. Jack was a mechanic's apprentice who had come to work at Gordon's Auto Repair. Tall, dark-haired, with a smile that lit up the entire street. It was enough for me to see him once to become all silly. I remember as if it were yesterday. It was the day of the church fair. I was there helping at the sweet stall when he arrived. Our eyes met, and that was it. I felt a chill in my stomach that I had never felt before. From then on, it was all sighs. I would invent any excuse to pass in front of the auto shop. I'm going to buy bread. I need to deliver this message. Everything was a reason to take a peek at him. Always dirty with grease, working under some old car. One day, I gathered my courage and went to talk to him. I almost died of embarrassment. I was all flustered, could barely form a sentence. But Jack was a sweetheart. He treated me with such kindness that I fell even harder for him. We started meeting secretly. It was always quick. A glance at church, a quick conversation in the square. If my father had suspected, it would have been the end of the world. But we didn't care about the danger. It was all so new, so exciting. The first kiss was on a Sunday afternoon. I had made up that I was going to visit Lucy, but in reality, I went to meet Jack behind the statue of Our Lady. How nervous I was. When he came close to me, I thought I was going to faint. The smell of grease mixed with the cheap cologne he wore made me all tingly. From then on, we would meet whenever possible. It was difficult, you know. We had to dodge my father's vigilance, the town gossips. But we found a way. A little note here, a quick meeting there. Jack was different from the other boys in town. He listened to me. You know, when I talked about my dreams of studying, of being somebody in life. He didn't laugh. On the contrary, he encouraged me. You're intelligent, Emily. You'll go far, he would say. But not everything was rosy. Sometimes I would be afraid. What if someone found out? What if Jack got tired of me? After all, I was just a small-town girl, and he had already been around the world. Once, we were almost caught. We were kissing secretly in the bandstand in the square when we heard footsteps. We ran away like two criminals. Afterwards, we laughed so much that our stomachs hurt, but the scare was big. Time passed, and the romance became more serious. We started talking about telling my parents, about making things official. I was afraid, but happy. I thought I had found the man of my life. Little did I know that destiny had other plans, that beautiful love would turn into a storm in my life. But at that time, I was blind. I only saw the good side of things, the dreams, the promises of eternal love. It was in this climate of dreams and promises that we ended up letting ourselves go. On a hot January afternoon, in the old abandoned shed at the back of the auto shop, we gave ourselves to each other. It was awkward, a bit painful, but for me, it was special. I thought I was sealing my destiny, that I would be happy forever, if I had known what was coming. But as they say, you never forget your first love, even with all the pain that came afterward. My dear, now the story gets heavier. It was right after that afternoon in the shed that things started to change. At first, I didn't notice. I thought it was just tiredness. You know, after all, I worked all day at the store, helped at home, studied at night. But then came the delay. 1 month passed, and my period didn't come. I was terrified, but I tried to convince myself it was just stress. Maybe it's because of the change in weather, I would say to myself, trying to believe it. At this time, I knew that if you didn't menstruate, it was a sign that you might be pregnant. I learned it from reading books. 2 weeks later, the nausea started. Every single day, around 10 in the morning, I would get dizzy, feel like vomiting. I would disguise it as best I could, but my mother started to suspect. "Girl, are you eating properly?" she would ask, looking at me in a strange way. It was Lucy who opened my eyes. One afternoon, while we were talking secretly in our usual spot, she dropped the bomb. "Don't you think you might be pregnant?" I felt as if the ground had opened beneath my feet. I spent the night awake, praying, begging it wasn't true. But deep down, I knew. My body felt different. My breasts hurt. I felt a fullness that I had never felt before. Jack and I arranged to meet at the same shed where everything had happened. When I told him, he turned as white as paper. At first, he didn't say anything. Then he started talking a lot of nonsense, that we could find a way, that he knew some herbs that would solve the problem. I was horrified. It had never crossed my mind to do such a thing. It was a sin. It was a crime. But Jack insisted. He said he was too young, that he wasn't ready to be a father, that it would ruin his future. I don't know what future, since every time we were together, it was only me filling his ear with my plans and dreams. I left there devastated. The man I thought would support me, who would resolve everything, had the audacity to suggest that. I didn't want to know about him anymore. Time was passing, and it was getting harder and harder to hide. My mother was already looking at me suspiciously. My clothes started to get tight. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went looking for Jack at the auto shop, determined to resolve that situation. But when I got there, I got the biggest shock. Mr. Gordon told me that Jack had left. He had found a job in a bigger city. I stood there, not believing what I was hearing. Jack had run away, left me alone to face all that. It was as if the world had collapsed on my head. I returned home like a lost soul. I cried all night, hidden under the covers so no one would hear. I felt betrayed, abandoned, afraid of what was going to happen. It was around this time that I started noticing the looks. The neighbors whispering when I passed by, the priest eyeing me strangely at Sunday Mass. It seemed like the whole world knew my secret, except my family. I knew I wouldn't be able to hide for much longer. My belly was already starting to show. No matter how much I tried to disguise it with loose clothes, it was just a matter of time until everything came to light. Every night, I would pray, asking for strength, for a miracle. Maybe if Jack came back. But deep down, I knew that the worst was yet to come. That when the truth appeared, my life would never be the same again. My dear, the day I feared the most arrived. It was on a Sunday night, after church. The whole family was gathered for dinner, as always. I could barely swallow my food. I was so nervous. My belly was already showing, even with the loosest dress I had. Suddenly, I felt that strong nausea. I got up quickly from the table, but I didn't have time to reach the bathroom. I vomited right there in front of everyone. A heavy silence fell over the room. My father looked at me in a way I will never forget. "Emily," he said, with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "Are you pregnant?" I couldn't answer. I just lowered my head and started crying. It was as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on everyone. My mother let out a muffled scream. Grandma turned as white as paper. My father stood up from his place at the table. I thought he was going to hit me, but it was worse. He looked at me with a contempt that hurt more than any slap. "You have disgraced this family," he said. "There is no place for you here anymore." My mother tried to intervene. Poor thing. But what could she do? My grandfather, who never spoke, supported my father. "She's a lost one, a harlot," he said, pointing that accusing finger. In that house, my father's and grandfather's word was law. Grandma Gertrude started crying softly, praying Ave Maria after Ave Maria. My brothers didn't open their mouths for anything, but their eyes were wide open. I went to my room to gather my things.
I could hear my father's shouts in the living room, cursing, saying that I had dragged the family name through the mud. After my brother Paul saw that I was packing my things, he tried to defend me, but he received a slap on the side of his face that left the mark of father's 5 fingers on his face. I left home that same night with a bundle of clothes under my arm and a broken heart. My mother hugged me secretly, gave me some money she had saved. "God protect you, my daughter," she said before closing the door. I stood in the street, not knowing where to go. It was as if the world had ended there that night. All my dreams, all my hopes, everything had turned to dust. I spent the night trembling from cold and fear. In the morning, I went to knock on Lucy's door. Her mother, Mrs. Zimmerman, looked at me with pity and let me stay a few days, hidden in the little room at the back. It was like a storage room full of dusty junk. It was really hidden. Her husband couldn't know at all because he was a friend of my father. The hardest part was at night. I couldn't turn on the light for him not to suspect. In the little room, there was no bathroom, so they left me a bucket that I would empty in the morning. Only God knows what a difficult time that was. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever. My belly would grow. People would talk. I had to leave. Try life somewhere else. It was the hardest time of my life. You know, pregnant, alone, with nowhere to go. Sometimes I thought about going back, begging my father to accept me back. But I knew it was useless. For him. I had died that night. You know, my dear, when I think about that time, I imagine how many other girls went through the same thing. How many had to leave everything behind, face the world alone, because of a mistake, a moment of weakness. If you're watching this and know someone who went through something similar, or if you yourself have faced such a difficult situation, tell us in the comments. Sometimes sharing our story helps other people not feel so alone. It was then that God put an angel in my path. Mrs. Zimmerman, Lucy's mother, knew a lady in the city who needed a maid. Without thinking twice, I packed my little bundle and took the first bus to Atlanta, Georgia. Arriving in Atlanta was a shock. You know, I had never seen so many cars, so much noise, so many people. I felt like a grain of sand in the middle of that huge world. I stood at the bus station for a long time, not knowing where to go, afraid of getting lost. Finally, I managed to get to Mrs. Eleanor's house. The journey from my small rural Georgia town to the big city of Atlanta was overwhelming. As the bus traveled north, I watched the landscape change from familiar farmlands to increasingly crowded urban areas. By the time I arrived at the central bus station in Atlanta, I was completely disoriented by the noise, the crowds, and the towering buildings that seemed to touch the sky. It took me nearly 2 hours and 3 wrong turns to finally find the address Mrs. Zimmerman had given me. It was an old 2-story house in a nice neighborhood. Mrs. Eleanor was an elderly widow who lived alone. When she saw me, all skinny and scared, she looked at me in a way that reminded me of my grandmother. "Girl," she said, "you need a plate of food and a good night's sleep." That night, lying in a little bed in the maid's room, I cried everything I had to cry, from fear, from homesickness, from relief for having found a place to stay. The first days were full of work. You know, I would put my maximum effort into every task, afraid of disappointing Mrs. Eleanor and losing the opportunity she had given me. I would wake up early, before the sun even rose, and would only go to sleep after making sure everything was impeccable. The rice always at the right point, the clothes ironed without a single wrinkle, the floor shining so you could see your reflection. I remembered everything my mother and grandmother had taught me about taking care of a house. Mrs. Eleanor was impressed. "Girl," she would say, "where did you learn to cook like this?" She was a very good lady. She would praise the windows I cleaned. And for me, that routine was good because it made me forget a little about what had happened to me. My belly was growing, and with it, my fear of the future. What was I going to do with a baby? How was I going to support a child? Sometimes at night, I would talk to my belly, apologizing for not being able to give my child a better life. Mrs. Eleanor knew about my situation, of course. One day, she sat with me in the kitchen and said, "Emily, having a child is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of a new world." Those words gave me the strength to go on. I started saving every penny I earned. I bought some baby clothes at a church bazaar, some cloth diapers. Mrs. Eleanor gave me a crib that was lying unused in a spare room. She said it had been her son's. Time was passing, and I was getting used to life in the big city. I learned to ride the streetcar, to shop at the fair, even to use the public telephone. It was all so different from my little town, but not everything was roses. There were days when the homesickness was so tight, it hurt. I would look at the sky, imagining if my mother was looking at the same stars. Thinking of me, did they miss me? Would they ever forgive me? You know, my dear, at that time, I thought my life was over, that all my dreams had gone down the drain. But today, I see that it was just the beginning of a new journey. And have you ever been in a situation where you thought it was the end, but it turned out to be a new beginning? Tell us in the comments. The months passed, and my belly grew. Mrs. Eleanor, God bless her, took care of me as if I were her daughter. She even took me to the doctor a few times, something I had never done in my life. When the day of delivery came, it was all a rush. The pain started in the middle of the night, and I, silly me, thought it was just an indisposition. But Mrs. Eleanor quickly realized what it was. In an instant, she had called a taxi, and off we went to the hospital. My son was born on a Sunday morning. When the doctor placed that little red crying package in my arms, I felt an emotion that is hard to explain. It was love, fear, joy, all mixed together. I looked at that little face and thought, that's it. Now it's the two of us against the world. I named him Michael. I chose this name because I read in books that it meant who is like God. And for me, that baby was a true miracle, a divine gift amid all the difficulty I was going through. The first months were difficult, nights without sleep, worry about every little thing. Is he breathing right? Is he hungry? Is he sick? But Mrs. Eleanor was my guardian angel, always there to help me and calm me down. First-time mother is just like that, she would say. I continued working, now with little Michael. While I cleaned the house, he would be in his crib, and from time to time, I would stop to take a peek, just to make sure everything was fine. He nursed so well, was gaining weight. I would take him to get vaccinated at the health clinic. With the money I had saved, I bought a baby carriage, and whenever I went out nearby, he would go with me. Time passed, and Michael grew. In the blink of an eye, he was already crawling around the house, exploring every corner. When he took his first steps, my heart almost exploded with joy. Each of his achievements was a celebration for me and for Mrs. Eleanor. Sometimes, watching him sleep so peacefully,
my thoughts would fly far away. I would think about Jack, his father. Had he gone on with his life as if nothing had happened? Would he ever want to know his son? These ideas would leave me with a lump in my throat, but I would quickly shake my head to chase away those thoughts. But you know one thing that kept me up at night, that blessed staircase? As I already told you, Mrs. Eleanor's house was a 2-story house, and little Michael was fascinated with that staircase. It seemed like there was a magnet pulling him there. I lived in panic, imagining him rolling and breaking himself down the steps. I decided I needed to do something. I talked to Mrs. Eleanor about putting Michael in daycare. It was close to the house, but it took forever for a spot to open up. In the meantime, Mrs. Eleanor, a sweetheart, let me improvise a little gate at the foot of the stairs. It was such a relief. I made the gate with some discarded boards I found in the backyard and some hinges. I placed the latch where he couldn't see it. It wasn't pretty, but it served its purpose. Michael would get all frustrated, clinging to the bars, trying to climb. But at least I could breathe a little easier. Even so, I wouldn't take my eyes off him for a second. Children are clever creatures. You know, every now and then I would catch him trying to find a way to get under or over that gate. But we learned to be a mother the hard way, right? And each day was a new adventure with my little one. But life doesn't stop, right? And I had to think about the future. I started saving every little cent I could. I wanted to give my son a better life. I wanted him to have the opportunities I didn't have. It was around this time that Mrs. Eleanor gave me the idea to go back to studying. Education had always been important to me, but circumstances had forced me to abandon my schooling. With Mrs. Eleanor's encouragement, I enrolled in evening classes at the local community center. It was challenging at first. I'd been away from formal education for years, and now I was attempting to balance studying with motherhood and work. The first few weeks, I would stare at the textbooks feeling completely overwhelmed. But gradually, with Peter's help and Mrs. Eleanor's unwavering support, I began to make progress. My natural aptitude for mathematics surprised even me, and soon I was excelling in my courses. "Emily," she said, "you're too intelligent to spend your life just cleaning houses." At first, I thought it was crazy. How was I going to work, take care of a child, and still study? But the idea kept growing in my head. I started studying at night, after Michael was asleep. Mrs. Eleanor would keep an eye on him for me. It was difficult. You know, there were days when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But I knew it was the only way to give my son a better future. Around this time, Mrs. Eleanor's house became busier. One March afternoon, she called me, all excited. "Emily, my middle son is coming to spend a week here with his family. Can you help me get everything ready?" Of course. I said yes. After all, I owed so much to Mrs. Eleanor that I would do anything to make her happy. I spent the weekend cleaning the house from top to bottom, arranging the guest rooms, shopping, all while taking care of Michael, who was already almost 2 years old and had endless energy. On Sunday afternoon, they arrived. It was Robert, Mrs. Eleanor's son, his wife Sally, and their 2 children, Lauren, 15, and Peter, 19. He had the same name as my brother. I was a bit awkward at first. After all, I was the maid of the house, but they were so nice that I soon felt at ease. Peter, in particular, caught my attention. Tall, with brown eyes, with a quiet but gentle manner. He was an engineering student at the university. all focused on his studies. When our eyes met for the first time, I felt a chill in my stomach that I hadn't felt in a long time. But, of course, I looked away, not daring to have any expectations. The days passed, and the family got along well. Michael loved having other people around, especially Lauren, who played with him as if he were a little brother. Peter, whenever he could, would join in the games, making Michael laugh with his antics. One afternoon, while I was studying in the kitchen after putting Michael to sleep, Peter appeared. "Can I sit with you?" he asked. I was embarrassed. After all, he was from the family, and I was the maid. But he insisted, and soon we were side by side, with him helping me with some arithmetic questions I was having trouble with. "So, Emily," he began, "Grandma told me a bit of your story. You're very brave. You know that I felt my cheeks burn. I wasn't used to compliments, much less from such a handsome and educated young man. Little by little, we grew closer. Peter would always find a way to help me with my studies, whether in the kitchen, in the yard, or when I was bathing Michael. He would explain the subjects to me, but it was with great respect. I never felt any ulterior motive from him, just a genuine desire to help me. It was on one of these study afternoons that Sally, Robert's wife, joined us in the kitchen while Peter was explaining some biology concepts to me. She watched us with a somewhat distant look, as if remembering something. Suddenly, she decided to share something that left me open-mouthed. She said, "You know, Emily, seeing you two like this reminds me a lot of myself and Robert." I was surprised by the comparison and a bit embarrassed, but she continued, "I also got pregnant young, before marriage." Oh, my dear, that conversation with Sally was one of those moments you never forget. You know, I was sitting there all awkward when she started talking. My jaw nearly dropped. I never imagined that such an elegant and composed woman had gone through something similar to me. She told me that she also got pregnant before marriage, but the difference was that when she told Robert, Peter's father, he was happy. Imagine that. He went straight to her parents' house to ask for her hand in marriage. Peter, who was there beside us, even confirmed it. Yes, Mother was pregnant with me. Goodness, I wasn't used to people being so direct. I was burning with embarrassment over that unexpected conversation. But then Sally came closer, took my hand, and said with eyes full of understanding, "Emily, your mistake wasn't loving. It was loving someone who didn't deserve you. What happened wasn't your fault." When she said that, those words touched me in a way I can't explain. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and just like that, I started crying. It wasn't just crying, it was sobbing. It was a release. Sally hugged me, and I clung to her. You know what's funny? I always thought it was all my fault. After all, Jack never forced me into anything. If I were to think about it, it was me who was always chasing after him. But there, in that moment, I realized that sometimes we blame ourselves. We judge ourselves too much. That day was a turning point for me. It was as if I had taken an enormous weight off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Understand? Oh, my dear, life is funny. You know, sometimes we need someone from outside to see things differently. Peter, who had remained quiet listening to the conversation, said, "That's why I admire Emily so much. Mom, she faced everything alone and is still here, fighting to give her son a better future." At that moment, looking at Peter and Sally, I felt immense gratitude, not just for the help with my studies, but for making me feel that I wasn't less because of my past, that my story, as difficult as it had been, didn't define me. From that day on, my relationship with Robert's family changed. I wasn't just Mrs. Eleanor's maid anymore. I was someone they respected and admired. And that, more than anything else, gave me the strength to keep fighting for my dreams. After the family left, life returned to normal. But something had changed. Every week, a letter would arrive from Peter. At first, they were letters talking about his engineering studies, telling me about the projects he was doing, and always sending me some math exercises to help me on the condition that I would respond and send the letter back. Oh, my dear, you should have seen the joy when the letter arrived. Mrs. Eleanor would be all happy handing me the envelopes. Look, Emily, a letter from Peter Michael. Tiny as he was, already recognized the blue envelope that Peter always used. In one of the letters, he sent a technical drawing he had made explaining how a bridge worked. I was impressed with all that, with the calculations, with the details. Peter had a way of explaining things that made them seem easy. You know, Sally also started sending messages along with her son's letters. It was as if, suddenly, I had gained a new family. But not everything was rosy. There were days when I would wonder if I wasn't dreaming too much. After all, Peter was an educated young man from a good family with a future ahead of him, and I was a maid with a child, studying at night to finish middle school. One night, after putting Michael to sleep, I sat in the kitchen to read Peter's most recent letter. Mrs. Eleanor appeared and caught me crying over the letter. "Well, what's this, girl?" she asked. "Oh, Mrs. Eleanor," I said. Sometimes I wonder if I'm not being silly again, if I'm not deluding myself. She already knew that, although Peter and I had not declared ourselves to each other. Something serious was happening there. She sat beside me and took my hand. "Emily, Peter is not like Jack. My grandson is a man of character. If he's writing, it's because he truly cares. He's not playing with you." The letters became different over time. It wasn't just about studies anymore. Peter began to tell more about his life, about the dreams he had. And I also began to open up more, to tell about my fears, my hopes. In one of the letters, he wrote something I never forgot. "Emily, you are the bravest woman I know. Not just anyone can start over from scratch and still think about studying, about growing. You inspire me to be better." When I read that, it was different from what I felt for Jack. It wasn't that blind passion that makes you lose your senses. It was a more mature feeling. It was beautiful in a different way. You know. My dear, Peter's letters continued to arrive for months, becoming more and more frequent, more and more. How can I say? Full of affection. He always asked about Michael, sent drawings for him to color. In one of these letters, he mentioned he was thinking of coming to spend his vacation at his grandmother's house. I got so nervous, afraid. It was different. Exchanging letters and seeing each other in person, you know. In letters, we think, choose our words, write several, crumple them up and throw them away if they're not good. But face to face was another story. And wouldn't you know, he really came. He arrived one July afternoon, alone this time. Michael, who was already 3 years old, ran to him as soon as he saw him. It seemed like he had known him his whole life. Peter picked him up, and the two had an animated conversation about the drawings he had sent that week. Our routine changed completely. Every morning,
Peter was already there waiting to take Michael to daycare with me. Then he would accompany me at work, always talking, making me laugh. At night, he made a point of taking me to school. Mrs. Eleanor would get all giddy seeing us together. Every now and then, she would appear as if by chance, with a coffee, a cake, making up excuses to stay there watching, talking with us. It was on one of these nights, coming back from school, that it happened. We were walking back, talking about 1,000 things, laughing freely. You know, I remember this day well. It had just stopped raining, and there was that nice smell of wet earth at a darker corner. He held my hand. Before I knew it, it was happening. We kissed, right there, under a street lamp. It was a sweet and enveloping kiss, different from anything I had felt before. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to come out of my mouth. And after the kiss, he took my hand and placed it on his heart. I realized it was just like mine, but I didn't show it. I thought, he'll think I'm forward. But then, my dear, fear hit hard. I pulled away from him with a jerk. In my head, all I could think about was what had happened with Jack. The fear of giving myself again, of ending up, well, you know, one thing leads to another, and when you realize, it's too late. Peter noticed right away. Calm down, he said, holding my hands. I'm not Jack. I'm not here to play with you. I respect you. I respect Michael. We'll go at your pace. At that moment, crying there in the street, I told him everything, my fears. I said I was afraid of giving myself, of trusting again that I couldn't give the wrong impression. You know what he did? He hugged me. That's all. He just stood there, hugging me, letting me cry everything I needed to. Then he took me home, quietly, holding my hand. From then on, we started a relationship without rush, without pressure. Peter respected my time, my limits. It was torturous being next to him and not, my goodness, I wanted to grab him. You know, Ave Maria, my dear. What a struggle it was, especially when we were alone, like on the way back from school. Peter there, so close, with that good smell, that caring way. There was one night I almost gave in. We were on the porch after everyone had gone to sleep. Peter hugged me from behind, started kissing my neck. Phew. I felt my legs go weak, but then that fear came back again, that weight on my conscience. I pulled away from him, running inside. Peter, poor thing, would get embarrassed. Sometimes. I could see that he too was fighting against his desires, but he never forced anything, never complained. He would just say, I'll wait until you're ready. Emily, there's no rush. It was such a different feeling from what I had with Jack. With Jack, it was just a flash in the pan, that thing of a silly girl. With Peter, it was deeper, more true. And perhaps because of that, it was so frightening. And you who are listening to me, have you ever had to hold your heart with a tight rein, even when wanting to give yourself? You know, some people don't like to talk about these matters. They get all touchy. But I think it's important to talk about this. It must be because in my childhood, everything was so rigid, so full of rules and prohibitions, that I ended up learning the hard way. That's why today, already old, I like to share these stories. Who knows? It might help someone not to go through the same thing I went through. The years passed like this, between letters and visits during vacations. Peter graduated in engineering and soon found a good job in Atlanta. By this time, we were already engaged. Meanwhile, I managed to finish my studies and even took a technical accounting course. It was Sally who gave the idea. Emily, she said, "You have a way with numbers. Why don't you take a technical course? And wouldn't you know?" She was right. I graduated with the best grades in the class. The wedding was simple, but beautiful. At the church in town, Michael was all proud, carrying the rings. When we got married, my boy was 6 years old. Peter insisted that it be near Mrs. Eleanor. "Grandmother is like a second mother to you," he would say. "It has to be here." Incidentally, this church was the same one where his parents had gotten married. After the wedding, oh my dear, I don't even know how to tell this part. Finally, we had our night of love. Oh, glory. After holding back for so long, respecting, we couldn't take it anymore. It was all so beautiful, so special. Peter, always caring, treating me like a queen. It was a different love, mature, built on respect and waiting. It was worth every moment of anxiety. Afterwards, we went to live in Atlanta, near Peter's parents and sister. The hardest part was leaving Mrs. Eleanor. Ave Maria. How it hurt. She cried so much at the farewell. Michael, poor little thing, clung to her legs and wouldn't let go for anything. "Grandma, I don't want to go," he would say, crying. She, with that way of hers, hugged him tight. For her, he was a grandson of the heart, since she had welcomed us when he was still in my belly. But you know what she said to us: "Go with God, my children. This is my place, where I raised my children, where I lived with my husband. I'm not budging from here." This was because we tried to convince her to come with us. In the first weeks in Atlanta, Michael would cry every night from homesickness, wanting to know when he would see his grandma again. Peter, a sweetheart, understood the situation. Every month, we would take the bus and go visit her. It was such a joy. Michael would come running as soon as the bus stopped. It was beautiful to see. With time, other children came. First Claire, who was the spitting image of her father, then Benjamin Benin, who took after me more, and Mrs. Eleanor was always there, steady and strong in her house, receiving everyone with that same affection. Her other grandchildren also went there a lot. It became the meeting point for the whole family. It was a party when everyone got together, you know, after studying so much. I ended up never working outside the home. Peter earned so well as an engineer that we could live comfortably. We bought a nice apartment in the center, a good car. Our life became beautiful. The best part was that now we could visit Mrs. Eleanor more frequently and even take her out for walks. But let me tell you something funny. Peter decided to teach me how to drive. Oh my Lord, what an adventure. I loved being behind the wheel. I felt like the queen of the hill. But when it came time to get my license, mercy, I failed twice. Can you believe that I knew how to do everything just right? But when the test came, I would get so nervous. Ave Maria. It was a crippling stomachache. Peter would nearly die laughing. Tell me something. My dear, do you have a driver's license, or are you one of those people who are afraid to drive? Well, now I'm going to tell you something very surprising that happened to me. After so much time in Atlanta, I began to feel a different kind of homesickness from my hometown. Something told me I needed to go back there to see my family again. Even without knowing how I would be received, Michael was already 15 years old, the same age I was when I left home. It was as if it were a sign. You know, One day, I gathered my courage and asked Peter to take me there. He was worried at first, afraid of seeing me suffer again. "Emily, are you sure? What if they don't treat you well?" he asked, hugging me. But after I explained that I needed to try, that it was important for me to close this cycle, he understood and agreed to accompany me. Peter was always like that, protective, but he let me make my own decisions. I also talked to my mother-in-law, whom I greatly respected. She, with that mother's wisdom, told me that I should go back, that this restless feeling was God speaking to me, sending me there. And you who are listening to me, if you believe that God speaks to us through our hearts, through our intuition, write in the comments. God knows the right time to heal wounds. I decided to go alone first, without the children. It was a Sunday afternoon, around 4 o'clock when we arrived in my town. It seemed like time had stood still. The same square, the same church, even the bell ringing like in the old days. But so much had changed. My heart almost came out of my mouth when I stood in front of my parents' house. Peter held my hand, gave me strength. The general store was closed. The gate was ajar, as always. We entered, and I knocked on the door. "Ave Maria," my mother answered. She stood there, looking at me as if seeing a ghost. Suddenly, she let out a scream and threw herself into my arms, crying. My father, who was napping in the living room, came to see what all the screaming was about. When he saw me, his legs went weak. I had never seen my father cry, but that day, it was a sobbing cry. Between tears and hugs, we went inside. My mother, still trembling, went to make some coffee. "Sit here. My daughter, you arrived at the right time." "I was just about to make some coffee," she said, drying her tears on her apron. My father couldn't take his eyes off me, as if I would disappear if he blinked. We sat there at the kitchen table, my mother serving coffee, her hands still trembling with emotion. Peter, so polite, thanked her. It was then that I properly introduced Peter. "Dad, Mom, this is my husband, Peter." My father shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for taking care of my little girl," he said. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of my little girl." Honestly, that didn't seem like my father. That didn't seem real. It was too good to be true. But then the nightmare began. My father started telling me everything that had happened after I left. After a sip of coffee to gather courage, he began to speak. "My daughter," he said, with a choked voice, "after you left, this house became a hell. Your mother would cry day and night. I pretended not to see, so as not to show weakness. But inside, I was broken." He paused a moment, took a deep breath, his hands squeezing the cup tightly. "Paul, your brother? My God, that boy never forgave me. Every day he would throw in my face, 'Dad was unfair.' Emily needed support, not condemnation. And you know what? He was right." My mother, who until then had been quiet in a corner, began to sob. "Your brother Paul, he's gone. My daughter. It's been 5 years. A truck accident on the road. He left a little girl, Maria Rita, just like you were when small." At that moment, I felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath my feet. "Paul, My brother Paul. It couldn't be. My legs went weak, and if it weren't for the chair there, I would have fallen. No, Mom, not Paul. That's all I could say before collapsing in convulsive crying. My mother came running to hug me tight, and we stayed there. The two of us crying together. It was such a great pain. He was so young. When he died, he was only 27 years old. The guilt of not having been there, of not having said goodbye, of not having thanked him for trying to defend me. All of this came to the surface at once. Peter also came to hug me. My father continued. He was crying too. Your grandparents are also gone. Emily, Grandfather Anthony died soon after you left. He said it was from heartbreak. Grandma Gertrude held on a few more years. But she's gone too. Your other brothers, all married, scattered around. He paused, looked me in the eyes. You know, daughter, every Sunday after church. Your mother would tidy your room, change the sheets, dust, as if you were going to return at any moment. And I would go there at night when I thought no one was watching. I would take that first communion photo of yours and cry over it. Peter held my hand under the table, giving me strength. That simple gesture said everything. He was there with me, supporting me in this difficult moment. My father noticed. He was clearly emotional. God is too good. Daughter. He gave me this chance to ask your forgiveness. He said, I was proud. I was too cruel to you. I let myself be carried away by what others would think, what they would say, and I lost precious years with my only girl. He paused a moment, as if seeking courage to continue. You know, daughter, that night when I discovered you were pregnant, the first thing I thought about was my father, how he was always rigid with me, how he taught me that a man has to be hard, has to show authority. His voice failed. I wanted so badly to prove to my father that I had learned his lesson. I wanted him to see that I knew how to be firm like him, and in this foolishness of wanting to please my father, I ended up doing the same thing that he certainly would have done if he had been in my place. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and hugged my father. He cried like a child, asking for forgiveness, saying he loved me, he loved. My mother joined the hug, and we stayed there, the three of us, trying to recover lost time. My father pulled away a bit from the hug and asked, Daughter, and the child you were carrying in your womb, what happened? Did you have it? It was my turn to tell my story. I took a deep breath and began. Yes, Dad. I had a boy, Michael. He turned 15 last month, the same age I was when I left here. God placed angels in my path. I told everything from the beginning. When I mentioned that Mrs. Zimmerman, Lucy's mother, had hidden me in the back room and then helped me go to Atlanta, my parents were open-mouthed. So that's where you stayed. My mother interrupted with wide eyes. I went to their house days after you left, asking if they knew about you. Mrs. Zimmerman looked me in the eyes and said she hadn't seen you in a long time. I was impressed with their loyalty. Poor things. They protected me as best they could. Even with my mother, they're suffering. They kept the secret to protect me. Mother said that years later she heard they had moved out of town. When I told about the children, my mother let out a sigh of joy. 3 grandchildren. My God in heaven, Father couldn't speak.
He just cried and smiled at the same time. We arranged that the following week I would return with the children. But before leaving for Atlanta, there was one thing I needed to do. We went to the house where my brother Paul lived with his family. It was a nice house, an inheritance from his wife's parents. When we arrived, I saw a little girl running in the yard. My heart skipped a beat. It was Maria Rita. It was like seeing myself as a child. I cried so much holding that little angel in my arms. I promised my brother's soul that I would never lose contact with his daughter again, that I would be present in her life from that day forward. Michael already knew my whole story. I had told him everything many years ago. He always thought he would never meet his biological grandparents. For him, his grandmother was Mrs. Eleanor. So when I told him I had gone to see my parents and that they wanted to meet him, he was surprised but very excited. It was a beautiful meeting. My father, when he saw Michael coming in, turned as white as paper. Michael was very tall, had surpassed him, handsome. Claire and Ben also came along, of course. My mother didn't know who to hug first. It was all joy. With time, we began to live like a real family again. On a long holiday, we took my parents to meet Mrs. Eleanor in Atlanta. Oh, my Lord, when she saw my father coming through the gate, she almost had a fit. Even without knowing him, smart as she was, she realized it was him and my mother. After all, I had never brought any strangers there, not even my friends. It was only from the gate outward. At first, she was serious with that closed face that only she knew how to make. But afterwards, it was all tears. You know, by the end of the day, the two of them were already sitting on the porch having coffee and talking as if they were old acquaintances. Time is truly a remedy for the soul. Afterwards, we went out walking to show them the neighborhood. We passed in front of the daycare where Michael stayed when he was small. His little school. My mother, poor thing, was amazed with all those streets full of trees. Look at all this abundance, she couldn't stop saying. There were oak and maple trees everywhere. Mercy. Some were so loaded that we had to change our path, afraid of getting hit by a falling branch. The fruits were so big that when they fell, they even made a hole in the dirt ground. The people on the street were always complaining, but nobody had the courage to cut them down. We had to watch the kids. As for the blackberry bushes, there were so many that we would go walking and eating along the way, just like birds. After that, I looked for my other brothers. Frank had moved to Chicago. He was well off, owner of a pharmacy. Albert had gone to Boston. When they heard I had returned, they came rushing to see me. Oh, my Lord, there was so much crying. Each one brought his family. Frank with his 3 children. Albert arrived with his wife and the twins. Marina and Melissa, this twin thing in Helen's family, Albert's wife, was a crazy thing. You see, her mother was a twin. She had twin sisters, and it seems the gift continued. Albert's grandchildren also came out twins, but not from both, only from Marina, who had 2 twin boys. Melissa had just 1 girl. Today, at 83 years old, I look back and see how life comes full circle. Time passed so quickly. I have 7 wonderful grandchildren, 3 from Michael, 2 from Claire, and 2 more from Ben. Ben, my youngest, surprised me when he said he had received an offer to work on the West Coast. He went to live in California with Veronica and the boys. There, my great-grandchildren were born, Tommy and Charlotte, children of Gabriel, and Dylan and Luna, from Isabella. They have never come to the United States,
but Peter and I managed to visit them 3 times. What an adventure that was. I found myself crossing the world. I struggled with foreign languages when traveling overseas. Only knowing how to say I love you in their local language, I was lost in that world of foreigners. Thank goodness, Peter. Always studious, understood everything. To this day, he makes a point of practicing English with the great-grandchildren via computer. For great-grandchildren is very little, but times are different. The generation has changed a lot. Nowadays, there are so many good contraceptive methods. So much information. Only those who want to have children have them. And when they want to. Very different from my time, when we barely knew how things worked. Peter, my companion through thick and thin, remains by my side. It's been 64 years together. The white hair, the wrinkles, the back pains. All of this came, but love only increased. Every day I thank God for putting him in my path. As I stood in the grove of old maple trees, watching the golden leaves fall, I suddenly realized I was just like them. Having lived through many seasons, having once fallen from a branch, only to find a new place to land. 7 decades have passed since I left that house with a broken heart. The wound has healed, though the scar remains. Peter, Michael, and my grandchildren are proof that happiness can grow from pain, just as wildflowers find their place among the cracks in stone. Sometimes I wonder how Jack is now. Did he ever think of the child he never met? And yet, in the quiet of summer afternoon dreams, I find myself back at the general store, hearing the soft chime of the bell and the scent of coffee mingling with the smell of kerosene. Somewhere between memory and reality, I am still little Emily, dreaming of a world bigger than the one I knew. Life, as my grandmother used to say, is like a lace cloth, most beautiful in the empty spaces where the light shines through. If my story has touched your heart, leave a mark and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories from elders like me. Those who carry within them a treasure trove of memories waiting to be shared.